what's new about it?
What's new about it is basically looking at things from an ecological and biochemical perspective. So an analogy that can be used, you take a racing car or a spaceship. If you didn't build those things out of the optimum materials, if you built a racing car out of cardboard, for example, you'd be laughed at, quite rightly. Yet, if we apply that same thinking to the biochemistry of ourselves and our neurological and consciousness systems, people don't think in that way. The nutrition is better applied in terms of physiology with animals in zoos than it is with human beings. So it's well understood that certain physiological forms...
So you're saying we feed animals in zoos better than we feed ourselves?
Yes, in terms of the natural diet. Health is... nature's only interested in one thing, and that's health.
Okay.
So the natural diet and natural environment for any living creature what will naturally give it health.
Okay.
And that essentially, on a nutritional level, is biochemistry. If you give a system the optimum biochemistry, as well as the right living conditions, and exercise, activity, and so on, then that will create optimum health. So what we have been building our neurological systems out of, according to Tony's perspective, has been non-optimal biochemistry, and we've been doing that for a very long time.
So it's like building a house and not using the right cement, it's going to fall down.
Yeah, it's going to fall down, or it's not going to function properly. And that's essentially what he's saying, is that the dominance of the left hemisphere has come about because we've built the structures of our neurological system, and we've maintained them, and we're fueling them with non-optimum materials. Okay. And that actually, I've seen, relates to what Fritjof Capra developed in his book The Web of Life, which was the first holistic ecological model of life. And he says structure, pattern and life process are the three fundamental characteristics of living systems. And life process is what builds structure, and structure in a certain pattern is how we recognise various forms of life, whether it's a plant, I know this one isn't actually alive, but there you go, or human beings, or oak trees, or higher primates. We recognise those as particular forms of life, and it's the life process that builds those forms of life. And one of the key things that Tony is saying, which is really groundbreaking in scientific terms, is that our ideas of genetic fundamentalism, that the gene is everything, it's very well understood in science that the key thing with genes is the transcription, what's called the transcription process, which is how the gene is read. And that fundamentally relates to the hormone regime that gene is sitting in, and what's called the epigenetic network, the relationships. Again, it comes down to relationships, the relationships the gene has with the biochemistry around it. If you change that biochemistry, you get a different result. That's why sex change works. You give a man different hormones and he will grow breasts, and there's tiny, tiny amounts. Yet the genetic model of evolution and the sort of Dawkins kind of model of how genes work, completely, that's not taken into account at all. So what Tony is saying is, if you go back to look at where all the higher primates evolved from, tropical forests, Tony's background is plant biochemistry, the complexity and the richness of the biochemistry in that environment, which would have been the environment we evolved in, is the perfect biochemistry for developing the most sophisticated living system we know of in the planet, which is our neurological system. There's nothing more sophisticated and complex in a mind-boggling way. And the biochemistry of fruit in particular, and Tony goes into details, bioflavonoids having a particular role, which are the fruit colourings and so on. if you take that biochemistry away, moving into the savannah, which we know happened probably because of climate change, so there was a shrinking of our natural habitat. We were forced onto the savannah. Then immediately the biochemistry changes, and we know from the way drugs change people's behaviour, whether it's culturally accepted drugs such as alcohol and coffee and cigarettes, less culturally acceptable now. These things immediately change the way people's brains work, and they change the way people behave, and the same with recreation.
So we actually did have a brain that was balanced and worked well and had the capacity for the bigger picture and intelligence living, and we fed it the wrong material, we fed ourselves the wrong raw ingredients, or not raw ingredients, as the case may be, and because of that our brains don't function to an optimum level now, and that's why you'll say we're making poor decisions that don't take into account our future. It's almost like we're committing suicide, isn't it, in one way?
Well, if we carry on as we are as a civilization, that is a good analogy. And of course,
we're addicted, aren't we? We're addicted to the wrong kind of foods, the wrong kind of living.
Addiction is a reality, and addicted to a certain form of development, economic growth. The economist who developed the idea of economic growth actually said this is an insane way to measure success. Yet, every country but one, as far as I know, in the world, that's the fundamental driving force. So we are addicted to that, and that is, in its current form, highly destructive, not only of the environment but of human beings. How much do we actually make the most of human potential? We're millions of miles from making the most of the vast human potential there is on the planet, and that's because largely of our addiction to certain ways of doing things.
You see, there's going to be two kinds of people watching this programme. I think it's more the latter than the former. There's going to be people that say, I'm not really interested, I want to live my life the way I'm living it, and probably have switched off by now. And there's going to be people who say, well, I agree with most of what you're saying, if not all of what you're saying. What can I do? And it's actually quite confusing. When we do our bit, we do our recycling. We know now we have to insulate our houses better. Some of us go with ecotricity because they build more windmills for power supply. People have hybrid cars. So people are kind of moving the right way, but is that enough?
I'd say it's probably not enough. And if you want a similar form of life, moving the deck chairs on the ship, if you like, if you want a materially oriented life, then that may be enough. I mean, I suspect it's probably not going to be, because whilst climate change has risen massively on the agenda and huge changes have happened, and this is my main area of work in relation to sustainability in the built environment, huge changes in what's being talked about, but actually in terms of action, carbon emissions are still rising.
It's trying to fix the symptoms again, isn't it?
Yes, we have to. I mean, going back to your question, we have to do those things. There are relatively straightforward ways to reduce carbon emissions in our homes, and how living in the world we live in, the economic aspect of that is important, and there are new schemes that are coming forward to enable people to do that. But if you want to know how to do that, Parity Project, Russell Smith, he's reduced his carbon emissions from his home by 78%,